Come along with us as we explore the broad world of preservation and the work being done to preserve, interpret, and save our past in a 21st century world. From aquaculture to historic foodways to forensic modeling, we're talking weekly with experts from across the globe. This is your host, Nick Redding. Welcome to PreserveCast.
Welcome to another Trades Takeover of PreserveCast. I'm your host, Natalie Henshaw, and Director of Historic Trades with Preservation Maryland. With me, I have Héctor Berdecía-Hernández. He is the Director General of the Conservation Center of Puerto Rico. Héctor, welcome.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being on. Héctor, we have a partnership with Preservation Maryland and the campaign and CENCOR. So we're definitely going to dive into that and what we're doing later. But we like to start out getting to know our guests. Can you tell us about your background and upbringing and what got you interested in history and preservation?
So I'm from Puerto Rico. I live in Puerto Rico. Since I was young, I realized I like to draw. I like the arts sector for some reason. So from a young age, I was exposed to museums, galleries, art. And when I was during my middle and high school in Puerto Rico, we have something that is called this specialized school. When we are exposed and get trained in different, fine arts courses. So from a young age, and I would say from when I was 14, 15 years old, I knew I wanted to be an architect. Or at least to study architecture. And I know that there were architects who dealt with historic buildings. I've been always fascinated also by history. And I remember when I was younger, I wanted to be an archaeologist. So I came from being an archaeologist. I decided to go to architecture. But then when I went to the School of Architecture at the University of Puerto Rico, I decided to do a double major in history. And then from there, I graduated and went to the Historic Preservation program at Penn, University of Pennsylvania. And at Penn, and from my previous studies, I decided that conservation, as art conservation and the conservation work was a right fit for me. I really enjoyed that, and I went to Penn and I specialized and became an architectural conservator.
Right. That's really interesting too. I'd love to get into what distinguishes it. And at Penn, did you go to the Historic Preservation Master's program, or was there something specific? Okay.
Yeah. I did my 2 years master there.
Okay. So, how did you, what was the training there for conservation, and what distinguishes conservation from preservation?
Sure. So there's a fine line between, both terms. In history preservation is it's a multidisciplinary, I think, discipline or field. That's the right word. And you have a lot of people that work in the historic preservation field that are related to policy, planning, history, history research, and a lot of people working with in architecture with design. So there are really different subsections. And in Penn, I learned that there was a thing called architectural conservation. And the difference is that the architectural conservator works mostly as a consultant for architects and is an intermediate figure between an architect and an art conservator. And we usually have a training in chemistry. We have a training, a little bit of trades. We get trained to see a lot of things that architects don't see, but we also see a lot of things that art conservators can do because of the scale of the work. We see the building as an object, that needs to be treated, it needs to be restored. And our approach is really specific and highly technical. And usually when we're dealing with tradespeople, usually the architectural conservator works hand in hand with tradespeople on how to perform treatment or intervene in a historic building. What are the specs, how we can work with different materials, how we collaborate. So it's really a collaborative work, but there, and I can tell a little bit of history of how that figure was developed in the 1970s in the US. But we're an intermediate between an architect and an art conservator. That's
okay.
basically it.
So maybe to put in an example too, I worked on a project where I was the tradesperson paint stripping a plaster frieze, and with the dental picks and the paint stripper. Would the role of the architectural conservator, would that be somebody who helped decide on the paint stripper to use based on the composition of the plaster and the safe? Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to the person there with the pick doing the scraping. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of the decision-making process that we do in architectural conservation is based on lab analysis and what type of analysis that we need to do. What are the right questions to ask before performing any kind of treatment or intervention in a historic building? It could be for timber, it could be for wood. Usually architectural conservators, a lot of them, we work on a broad range of materials, but some of us really specialize in specific materials. For example, I know architectural conservators that specialize in architectural finishes, mural painting, mosaics, others specialize in timber, others specialize in masonry. So there are a variety of even sub-specialties within architectural conservation. Still, we collaborate also not only with architects, tradespeople, and engineers, and everyone that works in historic, in construction world, but also we collaborate with conservators from the museums world. And for example, sometimes we found wallpapers in a historic building, and sometimes we do consulting with a paper conservator, or the same with textiles conservator, paintings conservators, and other specialties within the art conservation world to preserve specific features of the building. So we have the capability of having conversations with, I think, both sides of the aisle, in terms of what we can do, how to do it, and how to restore properly, or provide at least the most beneficial advice for both the client and, and the professionals involved in the project.
Do you have a specialty?
Well, my specialty, or at least something that I love, is mortars and concrete. Mortars and historic concrete, that has been part of, but I'm also interested in other areas such as archaeological field, and also preventive conservation. But I will say, if I have to choose a specialty, definitely masonry.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a good one. It's very interesting, I think. So what was your first project as an architectural conservator? Was it after you got to UPenn, or did you get to work in Puerto Rico on something?
So when I was at Penn, I was really exposed to like a little bit of those projects. I remember in one of my courses, we did a conditions assessment for a historic vault in one of the oldest cemeteries in Philadelphia. My thesis, which I chose my own topic and everything, it was a fully conditions assessment of an exposed unpainted plaster in a historic church in Puerto Rico, a modern sort of building from 1960s. And I had to do all the chemical analysis, the lab analysis for everything. So I can recommend, the best ways to remove any kind of paintings, consolidants, to consolidate the whole plaster work and exterior plaster work, which is all cement based. So I think from Penn, I got a great grasp of experience. I believe in that's one I choose Penn because I feel that it was really more practical than other programs in the U.S. In terms of at least conservation. But after I graduated, I been working on different projects. For example, one of them was the historic on the historic interior cupola of the capital of Puerto Rico. We did a full condition assessment. We did testing. We helped setting up the scope of work for the whole project. At the Normandy Hotel, also, which is a 1940s historic hotel in Puerto Rico, we've been doing like work with historic plaster ceilings, which they are collapsed, and we are basically setting up a huge project to restore those ceilings in for the restoration of the hotel. So I've been involved with architectural conservation projects for a while, but also as Director General of the CENCOR, I have been exposed to other kinds of projects related to collections care, to art conservation, and also running the day-to-day of a full nonprofit institution. So I've been trying to get both sides of experience with that.
Yeah. Did you ever anticipate that you would also be a professional juggler of all these different things?
No. When I graduated from Penn, I never thought I would be working, as a CEO of a nonprofit. I was envisioning myself sitting down in a scaffolding, doing just conservation work and preservation and dealing with buildings, but I never in my life thought that I will be doing what I'm doing right now.
Well, yeah, let's talk then kind of about the birth of CENCOR and how that did end up happening. So after grad school, you were working.
So it's interesting because I graduated in 2020. So it was the middle of the pandemic. And I didn't graduate in spring of 2020 because I didn't finish my thesis. All the labs at the university were closed. So I needed to do some testing, long, short story, I end up returning to Puerto Rico because the other thing is that at that time, there were a lot of people, a lot of firms were closing, a lot of people being laid. So it was a complicated panorama at the time. And I realized, hey, maybe I should go back to Puerto Rico to, work on this small project that my current boss, like he was looking for someone to start maybe a trades program in Puerto Rico at the time. And I said, hey, this might be a fun project, maybe 6 months or something. And then I could get back to the US and get the training that I wanted. It eventually never happened. That small project within the government of Puerto Rico, it became a fully functioning nonprofit, independent nonprofit, and CENCOR was born from that project. And originally, it was more related to traditional trades and how to, move that. But at the end, we realized that it needed to be a bigger project than just historic building trades. And then CENCOR was born. CENCOR was born from the need especially after Hurricane Maria, Irma, earthquakes, and all these natural disasters that had been happening in Puerto Rico for the past 6 and 5 years, on the need of a nonprofit institution that can promote discussion and research and an understanding of our cultural heritage, but also that can promote the technical aspects of future buildings, for collections, for archaeology. And we have to consider the specific context of Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, we don't have a lot of people that are trained. We need a lot of people related to the trades. to work on the reconstruction process after hurricanes, we need qualified architects to perform work. We need more conservators to work on the museums. Right now, the museum sector in Puerto Rico has been challenging for them to find local conservators to perform work on their collections. So we have a lot of challenges going on in all sectors related to cultural heritage. And CENCOR, we see CENCOR as a possibility to collaborate, to connect local institutions with international and national, US-based institutions, to promote resources, because not only the need of people, to perform work, but also how we find resources, economic resources to homeowners, property owners, to specific nonprofit organizations that don't have the money or the means to restore their headquarters, which are usually historic buildings. So it's a challenge, and we've been trying for the past 3 years. We now got on our third year as CENCOR was born in September 1st, to at least to develop a highly sustainable institution. And part of how we did it is that we not only receive funding from donations and grants, but also we perform technical services. We get hired, we get contracted by private owners, local governments, state government to perform work on and do any kind of project related to historic preservation. And we have, so from the beginning, we've been thinking about how to make, not only to help and assist within the needs of Puerto Rico, but also how to make this a sustainable thing. And for that, CENCOR, we had, at least so far, we have been successful.
Right. So you brought this point up to the landscape of what currently exists in Puerto Rico, and it sounds like CENCOR is fitting a need that wasn't there. So for one, is that accurate? And then two, what really was that landscape of training and education for anybody that wanted to get into this field in Puerto Rico? What was there, if anything?
Well, from one of the reasons I left Puerto Rico to get trained and educated in UPenn was because we didn't have, until really recently, a master's program for people interested in doing historic preservation. So that was one of the issues. The second thing is that we don't have a lot of trades. We don't have a lot of trades training related to historic buildings. Actually, we don't have none. I can tell you that. We have vocational programs that focus on more contemporary work. And I will tell you, for example, woodworkers and carpenters, a majority of those programs, what is happening right now in Puerto Rico, is that they were trained to work only on PVC as a material. So if you find a woodworker right now in Puerto Rico, that got training or they getting trained or whatever, they only work on PVC for kitchen cabinets or for furniture, or so it's really complex because the demand for the services, for the market demands is just furniture using PVC. But something is furniture, and we know that architectural woodworking, architectural carpentry, that's another field, a completely different field.
Very different.
Yeah. And so that's the situation right now. We got a lot of people that are being trained in, and they're doing a lot of work with PVC, not a lot of conscience about working with wood and traditional trades. And I will say this is not only part of, this is not a problem related to Puerto Rico. This is an ongoing problem also in the Caribbean. in the Caribbean region as general. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, for example, we have been collaborating with them in some projects and stuff, and they face the same challenge. They can't find traditional trades people. Dominican Republic, they're doing the same. Cuba, so it's a regional concern, and I know it's a worldwide concern about this. So yeah, that's part of what we're trying to do, is not only setting up a program for them in collaboration with other institutions on how to train the next generation of architectural woodworkers, architectural carpenters, people who can lay bricks, the masons that we need, because we have a lot of bricks, historic buildings in Puerto Rico, but also to sit down with the current key players in the industry, the construction industry, and having a conversation, an honest conversation about what we're doing, how we can change, how we can improve, because that's the only way that we can, change and be a catalyst for change, and see what possible collaborations are, what resources are. And I feel sometimes we failed in that sense, because, the cultural heritage sector, we often want to work only within our own people. But I think the key for anything is just to cross out to other fields and start having a conversation and do any kind of outreach to them and see how we can collaborate to, advance any kind of situation and overcome any challenge. We're doing that.
Yeah, totally agree. We can talk about some of that how to towards the end. I'm going to lay down some of the obvious just so everybody's on the same page. But Puerto Rico, most people are Spanish as first language speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I know this is an anecdotal question. I'm not going to ask you for an actual data point to prep you, but how many people on the island do you think are comfortably bilingual with English?
I don't have the exact number, but I will tell you, Puerto Rico is completely a fully Spanish speaking island. So English, we usually learn English since kindergarten through high school, even university courses. They teach English, and I think if you talk to them, like, they can understand. Everyone can understand English here, but we are a little bit afraid of speaking the language and also writing. But if you go to anyone around, they will understand what you're saying. And that's also another barrier for resources or for funding for preservation. A lot of, as a U.S. territory, we can apply for funding, for grants, for stuff. But the opportunities out there are in English. So that's definitely the language barrier. It prevents us from getting access to resources, but also the relationship with the U.S. also prevents us to get other kind of funding, because, for example, we got other countries in Latin America, from the UNESCO, from Spain, that we would like to get resources and get people to come to Puerto Rico, but all our foreign relations are controlled by the U.S. So it's a little bit difficult and challenging to even sit down with an international community or regional community of preservation practitioners to tackle the issues that we are facing in Puerto Rico, which are really specific to Puerto Rico. We have to think that the problems that California are facing, or Oklahoma, or any other state, are really different of what Puerto Rico is facing. And because not only by our cultural differences as, it's a Spanish-speaking country, also I will say that Puerto Rico itself, we see ourselves as a different nation than the U.S. That's another aspect, our history is totally different than the U.S. in most part. The U.S. came to Puerto Rico in 1898, but for other 500 years, we were a colony of Spain. So our history sometimes gets intertwined with the history of the U.S., but also the economic context is different. In Puerto Rico, the poverty rates are increasingly high, access to resources for nonprofits, the challenges and the crisis get overlap of, are like layers. And usually heritage is considered like at the is the bottom of the list of needs, that we have to consider in Puerto Rico. So it's challenging. It's challenging not only by the environmental and the climate change and everything that's happening, but also the socio-economical context of what Puerto Rico is and the political issues that we face.
Right. Yeah. And I know we've talked about it before, but after Hurricane Maria, there was funding coming in for some of the cultural heritage, but because of the bureaucratic complications with it being a territory, it just took years. Mm-hmm. Is it still in have you gotten some of the funding for it by now, or is it still in progress?
No. And usually, yeah. And usually we had some colleagues from other islands around the Caribbean and from Latin America that they wanted to come into Puerto Rico to do some salvage work for heritage and everything. It was really difficult for us. It was really difficult to navigate through U.S. ICOMOS, to navigate through the State Department. So it's complicated, and obviously the U.S. is so big that we are not, in the first tops of the priorities for the whole nation, and we can understand that, but it's a complex situation when you can't address the needs of your own heritage or the needs of your own population because of these structural barriers that are in place because of, economic and political issues. So,
and I know you already mentioned the Virgin Islands. It's in a similar spot. And I know there's a preservation group out of Guam. I'm not sure about Samoa or Marshall Islands. I think those are the 5 territories, although I might have missed one and I'll kick myself later. But, it's, I bet they are sympathizing with the struggles that you have as well for all those reasons, how to protect the heritage as a territory and with a history that's distinct from a lot of other contiguous U.S. history as well. It's a lot to chew on. Yeah,
definitely.
So you've also mentioned partnerships, and we have one. I think you're very great about working with a lot of different organizations on these partnerships. And ours is towards Spanish translations of curriculum. And, we've touched on some of it, but I'm wondering even for yourself, like I have my college roommate is half Colombian, and she was pretty fluent in Spanish, but she went to med school and had to take just a course in technical language in Spanish because she wanted to be a bilingual doctor for people. But learning the technical language of medicine is beyond what most people learn as they're fluent. So they just had a class in that. What was it like for you going to school and learning a lot of the technical language around conservation? Kind of to your point of you can be functionally fluent, but that's way different than being a specialty fluent. Yeah.
It was really challenging. For me, I received a good education in Puerto Rico. At least the public university system is the best system, island-wide. But changing completely and getting to a new place like Philadelphia at the time, for me, was a little bit a cultural shock. And one of those...
Philly is a cultural shock for me.
Yeah. And the thing is that I had to navigate through that, but also the language was definitely something that I really have to, learn how to work and not only take, I remember I had to take courses outside of my traditional semester coursework to just, refine my skills in orthography, grammar. I have to put a lot of effort on my papers to be reviewed just before the deadline, just to get through. So it was, especially my first year at Penn, was really challenging on learning a lot of specific terminology, how to think in other ways, and how to put ideas in a way that makes sense. So it was definitely a challenge for me. But I will tell you that this was really rewarding. Now, I remember when I was writing down my thesis in full English.
Impressive.
Yeah, and I felt really comfortable doing it, and I can communicate it, and that has allowed me to seek specific partnerships and collaborations with other institutions and organizations in the U.S., the States. Right. And obviously, I think if the more you learn languages, that's the better. I have in my life checklist, I want to learn French, I want to learn Italian. So it opens doors for you, definitely. And for us in Puerto Rico, being able to dominate both languages, it's definitely a blessing, because we're not only thinking about communicating with people in the States, but also we have other minor islands in the Caribbean which they speak English and French and Dutch. So we have that opportunity also to communicate with other neighboring islands in the Caribbean, and share experiences, stories, and I think that's the importance of dominating language. Yeah.
Well, as somebody who has partially learned about 3 different languages, I am very impressed at your level of English fluency, particularly in this subject, and also very thankful that you are this fluent. And I, just on a personal note, I guess you could say I technically learned Spanish in elementary school, but the classes were truly awful, and I did not learn a thing. I think I only remember pantalones from it, and that's it.
Yeah,
and the instructor yelled rapido at me out all the time. Pantalones and rapido.
Yeah. I mean, it's practice, and everyone can. I think everyone can learn. You just have to be patient with yourself, and and think. And now I will say it's interesting, because half of my thoughts are in Spanish, but half of my thoughts are English.
Oh, cool.
And sometimes I have to think about what I'm going to say. I should say it better in English, but I have to think about how to do it, to say it in Spanish. So it's complicated, but it shows how our brains are wired, and they're it's another world. It's wonderful, but yeah.
Well, I'll pull out some stats too about our partnership, and especially this language component, because we have both talked about the push in preservation to become more inclusive and diverse. And my experience on job sites is that it is already diverse. Mm-hmm. And many of the people working on historic sites are first language is Spanish and primary language is Spanish. And very many non-white people working on these historic sites. There's not a lot of gender diversity, and that's like one of the areas. And so when we talked about it, it's like, it's not necessarily that we need to get more Spanish speakers on the site. It's that we need to make the certification and educational resources accessible to them. Because many of it, like I worked some very skillful masons from Guatemala and Mexico, and they definitely knew what they were doing. We don't need to train them. What we need to do is resources to show that they know what they're talking about. And so, the U.S. has the second largest population of Spanish speakers in the world, with over 41 million native Spanish speakers. And about half of those, or 8% of the U.S. population, have limited English proficiency. And then about a third of construction workers identify as Hispanic or Latinx. So you can maybe poorly align all that data, but it shows that there's a very big component of construction workers whose primary language is Spanish. So we've worked on a translation projects. We've gotten 2 grants to kick it off. The Historic Preservation Education Foundation gave us a grant, as well as the Foundation for the Advancement in Conservation, because you're a member of the AIC.
Yeah, the American Institute for Conservation. Yeah.
Thank you. I knew I was about to get the acronym wrong. Yes. So very excited about this project. Obviously, there's a need. And this is a really good example of how you're partnering with these different organizations across the country. But I gave Gus the intro to why we're doing it. Do you want to talk more about it, like what you're doing and how you're going to be using it?
Sure. So, and this is a conversation that I have with across other organizations like APT, AIC. We have a huge population, as you mentioned, the Spanish speakers in the construction world. But as a student that came from Puerto Rico, and I didn't find a lot of preservation resources available in Spanish. And for me, navigating through the preservation world as a newcomer was really difficult, as a native Spanish speaker. So I've been trying to push different organizations to translate some of the educational resources that they have to the Spanish language. And mostly because not only we need it in Puerto Rico, but also we understand that, the huge amount of people that work in communities across the U.S. that are Spanish speaking, and sometimes they don't even get any kind of educational resources about preservation, or how to deal with a historic building, how to deal with historic materials, and that's part of if we want to build an inclusive and diverse and equitable field, we need to start making, this educational content accessible to different languages. And we have to acknowledge that the U.S., the great majority speaks English, but we have really diverse population, and that's part, is part of the world of the work that we need to do in the field to make it more diverse. It's not the only thing, but it's a small step, in the path forward for that.
Yeah. And would this have been something when you went to UPenn that would have made you feel more supported, helped you out when you were there? I know you said it was difficult at first and you're proud of where you came from, but if there was a resource like this, would you have felt more included and more supported?
So I think one of the good things from my time at Penn was that I wasn't alone. I have one of my colleagues, friend Monica. She's also from Puerto Rico. So we were in the same class, and I had the chance and the blessing of navigating the whole grad school experience with her. So there was a lot of support between both of us as Spanish speakers of the assignments, the content, the readings. If I didn't understand something, she will explain, and that helped me a lot. But I recognize that not a lot of Spanish speaking students that move to the States to get education, their graduate level education, have that opportunity. So in my experience, I was lucky. And part of the things that, again, I think it's important to acknowledge that preservation, and I saw that in Penn, I saw that in every meeting or conference that I attend, the preservation field is not diverse. It's mostly composed of white people. And even though, and that also is a problem because it talks a little bit about what type of heritage we are considering heritage, what
Yep.
is deemed to be preserved and what's not, and excluding people from the trades, excluding people from the actual preservation work. It's difficult because it's a challenge first, but also it's problematic because we have the chance there of excluding histories that usually are not considered or not visible, to everyone. So in my sense, for me, I will tell you my experience. That was my particular experience, and one of my missions within the field is to start building up, those small changes to make the field more accessible to other people.
It's a great mission. And I want to talk first about affinity groups and then also what we can do to be good allies in that mission too. But for me and myself in Savannah, we've started up, a women in trades group. It's very unofficial, but we get together once a month for a happy hour. And that small little thing has been huge and has helped a lot of us feel supported and able to talk about what we're going through and network. And it doesn't solve the problems, but it's a really good space. And what you were talking to about having somebody with you going through the same thing and having that partner was also super helpful. So I know you're also a member of Latinos in Heritage Conservation, correct? Is that
not currently, but I have been having conversation with them, and they're great. Their work they're doing is great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, groups like that, I think, can be a very powerful, play a very powerful role in this, in both getting more people into it and giving that space for people as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about that. But what are your thoughts on something like that, affinity groups and their role in this?
Well, I have a mixed feelings because, I really do understand that, affinity groups are something and are really beneficial for, quote, and I quote always this, minorities, because I put that in question if we are really a minority.
Relative.
But it's really helpful for us, to get people to, that understand, and you have the support group. But also I feel like, and from my perspective, coming from Puerto Rico, which is a totally social or cultural different context than the States, our racial, tensions are really different in Puerto Rico than in the States. That's something. But looking at what, corporations, institutions are doing, like, setting up diversity and equity officers and policies and stuff, I feel sometimes that it's like just checking. Checking is part of the checklist. Sometimes it's not meaningful change, and I'm really worried about that. How we can do meaningful change, I believe, is just putting the money where your mouth at, and putting resources to lift, underrepresented voices, putting money and human and educational resources to people that hasn't been on the forefront for decades, or centuries. And that's, if you want to do meaningful change, that's the way the way to do it. Not just having equity and diversity policies, which are necessary, but sometimes it needs to be supported by a more robust infrastructure of resources to reach diversity, equity, and inclusive environment. Right. So that's at least my personal view of what is happening in the U.S. And we still having the same racial tensions, the same issues. The political context is not helping at all, in solving any of these issues. but we have to be first strategic of how, to promote diversity in a meaningful way, not only on papers and just for a slogan or a marketing campaign. And again, putting resources, available to be available for underrepresented people. And I think that's crucial for, to advance real and meaningful equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Right. And instead of minorities, I liked what you said, the underrepresented, because that's more accurate to, what's actually happening too. Mm-hmm. Like I said, on job sites, it's pretty reflective of the U.S. population, but in admin and the decision making, it's not reflective. Mm-hmm. So to the next point about being a good ally for this, I think you and I got connected because we were introduced by some people, kind of early on when I started my role and you started yours, some people introduced. And my goals have been trying to get some resources behind this and listening to what's needed and getting more of those connections and seats at the table. But I guess a self-assessment too, making it real. Is that effective? Is there anything more different that we can do? And I guess this is also a podcast, so people can't see me. I am white. I am a woman, so I'm a minority or underrepresented in that aspect of construction, but I am white. What more different can we be doing in this role to help support these goals and this mission?
I think that's a complex question because there's so much going on. There are different factors, and I will tell you this, for example. I navigate between the field of preservation, but also the field of art conservation. And for example, in the field of preservation, we have a lot of white men, working in constructions and engineers, architects, and trades. But on the other side, in the art conservation world, the vast majority of conservators are white women.
Interesting.
So in those two different contexts, I'm myself. I'm a minority, but in different contexts, and I had to learn how to navigate, through both worlds in sometimes, sometimes, and to consider how to work with them. And that's why I say it's complex, because not all the contexts are the same. The needs are different from every population. For example, I know I was really upset when from my time at Penn, I know I was Latino in the program with Monica, whatever, but in the whole School of Design, Winsman School of Design, there were like only 7 to 8 Black students. So there are really big issues with the underrepresentation of African Americans within, academia, within the preservation field. That I know there are amazing initiatives going on towards addressing that, those gaps. But yeah, how you work on those different levels, and different contexts. So it's really a complex question. How and again, I will stick definitely with not only having people at the table in the table to make or in the decision making process, but also I think listening to them, and to not only listening just to hear them, but also listening to understand what our different groups are saying, understand and be more empathetic with our lives, on what we have been through, as underrepresented people groups. I think that's really important, and obviously, I think compromise. There should not only hear them, it's not only about here people and appointing a diversity officer, no, but also what are compromises that we can get to do meaningful change, actionable items. What are the deliverables from that compromise? And obviously a commitment to, deliver for us. I think that's really important. So if you have that mentality, that mindset, I think that will definitely work.
All good things. All good things. And I guess how that even translates to your work and what you're doing with CENCOR. You have several training initiatives going on. Is that for Puerto Ricans exclusively? Is it in Spanish language? I know some people have expressed interest in the U.S., and I was wondering about the language with it too. And, can people come down there to train or support or teach or help with projects? How can people get involved with CENCOR?
Yeah, so our projects are mainly, as you know, as we are native, Puerto Rican local organization. Our model is that we are embracing the regional conservation center model. So we are starting small. We are getting bigger, and we are developing our institution. And our goal, ultimate goal, is to be a service facility for the Caribbean region, not only Puerto Rico. And we're doing actually collaborations with different organizations and even governments in the region. For example, we've been assisting the U.S. Virgin Islands with some of the work that they have done. They're doing with a trade school that they're trying to set there. We're having conversation with in Cuba with other organizations that they're doing like work and practitioners, that because we can learn a lot from them. But also having this partnership with established institutions or organizations in the U.S. that allows us to have that flexibility of sharing not only resources, but also giving people, especially young people in Puerto Rico, opportunities to get trained, to get their internships, to do stuff, and to become a professional in the preservation field. And that's something that we are really strongly support, and we are trying to, foster. We acknowledge that we don't have all the resources, human resources or professional resources in Puerto Rico. So we depend a lot from people to come to Puerto Rico, work on capacity building initiatives, so we can, continue. And usually the heritage sector is like that in every, in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, everywhere. The preservation and heritage field in general have been built for the past 76 decades, I will say 6 decades or 8 decades, on collaboration and sharing knowledge between practitioners from different parts of the world. And that's the way we are thinking about CENCOR. We are a platform of collaboration, partnerships. We do projects with institutions and states, with local institutions, how we connect them with services that they need to preserve and promote, the protection of our heritage, but also how we structure any kind of educational trainings or opportunities for people from Puerto Rico to go out and get trained, and eventually we want to foster also people coming into Puerto Rico to do that same. So that's part of our vision. We're still small. I think we're in the good path to that. So we'll see how it goes in the coming years.
Yes, I love especially that last part. We talked with Kathy Rodriguez in San Antonio. They have the Living Heritage Trades Academy, and they were talking with I think Preservation Maine about how to do an exchange program almost for some of their trade students. So how can the students at San Antonio go and work up in Maine for a couple of weeks and vice versa, because the environments are just so different and the building types are so different. I would love to get that set up just across the country, then they can go to Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico can, go to Montana or something. That would be very cool.
Yeah, hopefully. And and again, considering our context is a little bit complicated because our heritage is different than from Montana, and the terminology, the materials. So it's challenging, but we can work through that in terms of how to set up training and collaborate. That's our goal. So
right, and we can make it more relevant, but having a fun difference can also reveal like the whole spectrum of what you can work on too. And in Savannah, there's not log cabins, and I worked with HistoriCorps out in Denver, and suddenly got to work with a lot of log cabins. And that's just not something I ever would have gotten my hands on in Savannah. So I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities. If anybody listening feels like funding them, we're receptive. Stay with the translation. So Héctor, to wrap up, we have a few questions we like to ask each of the guests too. Do you have any favorite must-read trades books or preservation books or conservator books or podcasts?
Well, I love the English heritage set of books, like the building conservation books. My God, I love them. And for those who don't know, they can look it up in Amazon or other websites. There's a set of 10-volume series of different topics: timber, plasterwork, mortars, glass, concrete, and they're amazing. I mean, they show from the history, obviously, or UK based, but they show a really good understanding and depth of not only the history of the materials, construction technologies, but also how to assess, repair, what are the considerations, even the legal aspects of how to perform preservation work. My dream is to have something like that for Puerto Rico in Spanish, and that might take like maybe a couple of decades to get through, but definitely those are my to-go books, and they're really helped me out a lot as emerging practitioner at the university to learn more about. Also, I think the U.S. has something similar, which is the preservation briefs of the National Park Service. Definitely really helpful. I think the majority of them are not updated, and that's something I'm having a conversation with the folks at the National Park Service, and they're really pushing and trying to update them. But they're really helpful. If you're an emerging practitioner and someone that is curious and wants to learn more about the technical aspects of preservation, those are two of the main resources. I have other books that I can talk about, like, for example, Conserving Buildings from Bernard Fielding. We have other books, for example, the Tom Yester book about 20th century building materials. I love that book also. Yeah. Actually, he was my boss, so he signed me a copy of the book. Yeah. So those kind of books I really enjoy. I enjoy them because you can learn so much from them. Yeah, and they're really basic. The language is really basic and not. They have a balance of highly technical stuff, but also something that you can understand. And I can talk more about other more highly technical books of conservation, but for general audience, I will definitely recommend those.
Those are both really good primers, and I can definitely attest to the preservation briefs. They're great how-tos if you need to get started and publicly available. All right. So if people want to learn more or find out more about you, how can they do that? Where can they go?
So I'm on LinkedIn. They can look at my last name, Berdecía-Hernández. Also, you can go through our website. It's the Conservation Center, CENCOR, CENCORPR.org. We're online and also on social media on X, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, CENCOR PR, at CENCOR PR. And obviously in Spanish, it's Centro de Conservación y Restauración de Puerto Rico. But you can look at it and you can also subscribe to our newsletter. So we're publishing everything that we're doing, events and stuff that's happening. It's mostly based in Puerto Rico, but again, in the future, we want to expand and have more collaborative projects abroad. So,
yes, and we'll have links to those in the show notes, as well as the preservation briefs and the building conservation books. So, last question. What is your favorite historic place or historic site? I know it's like
I didn't say this at the beginning, but the reason I end up in preservation is because I studied in, I think, most beautiful school in Puerto Rico. It's one of the biggest schools in the island. I think it's the biggest. Actually, it's a Spanish revival style building from 1924. And, for me, it's amazing. It's the Central High School. If you are curious about it, it's Central High School in Puerto Rico, Santurce. And that was my inspiration to work, on history preservation, definitely. I spent my middle school, high school there learning. I saw the issues that the building itself faced, about deterioration, flooding, everything. And I think one of my dreams still is to just be involved in any kind of preservation project for that building in my future. Right. So that's my top choice.
Is it in San Juan?
Yeah, in Santurce. Yeah.
Okay. I think I found a photo of it, and if so, we'll share it.
It has a full columnade in the front. These huge columns in the front. It's a beautiful, beautiful building.
Yeah. Is it this one? Can you see it?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. We'll also put that in show notes because, that's beautiful. I can see why you got into preservation. That is gorgeous. Oh my God.
And the ceilings are plasterwork from the 1920s. The original roof system is still in place. It's really deteriorated because of the hurricanes, and major part of the building is has a lot of integrity. Actually, from 100 years from now. So.
Oh yeah.
So it's a really wonderful, wonderful building. The cross ventilation system, the way it's assembled, the materials. It has terrazzo from 1920s in the interior. So it's wonderful. Yeah.
I love how these stuff, impressive and inspiring historic structures can get people into it. I think that's why we all have this story and why this question could be hard for some people.
Yeah.
But that one, that's fantastic. You're lucky you got to go there. I'm jealous. Personally jealous. Well, Héctor, thank you so much for joining us. I know we've been talking about it for a while, and it's just been very great to have you on and have people learn about what you're working on and CENCOR and everything related to it.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me, and have a great weekend.
You as well.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation, and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.